Hello everyone, welcome to the Mughals to Mahatma series of Convert IAS. See, the topic of this video is socio-economic conditions of the 18th century. Now, when we study history, history traditionally was studied in terms of the political changes. So we study history in terms of chronology of the kings. But modern historical understanding is also about the society and the economy of that time period. UPSC has also changed the trends. UPSC has been asking questions, specifically terminologies. Terminologies means particular term. For example, a term called Banjara. What is Banjara? So such questions began to feature in the UPSC prelims question paper as well. So to cover all that, you have to understand the social and economic conditions of a particular time period. Remember a UPSC previous year question where they asked about why indigo export from India was stopped. So to answer this question, you need more than facts. You need to understand what is the situation, what was the socio-economic condition in that period. Then only you can answer a question like this. So this video is intended to cover that angle, the social and economic aspects in the 18th century period. So 18th century, you should always understand what is the political happenings in that period. Only then the socio-economic conditions will make sense to you. So the first and foremost political development is the decline of Mughals. 1707, Aurangzeb dies. Then till 1857, you have an era of weak Mughals. So this is a time period when the centralized system in Indian politics was declining. So patronage is also declining. Patronage is something that is directly related to economy because artisans and craftsmen are dependent on patronage from the kings, and Mughals were someone who gave a lot of patronage. So it is directly connected to the economy. So decline of Mughals is something that is happening. Second, you have the rise of Marathas. Remember the era from 1720 to 1761. This is the time period when Peshwas consolidated the Maratha Empire. Now Shivaji's empire is before this. Shivaji became the Chhatrapati in 1674 and he died in 1680. So Shivaji is someone who is from the 17th century. But it is the Peshwa era that we are discussing in the 18th century. That's when Marathas consolidated themselves. Now see the successor states, Bengal, Bihar and Awadh. Now there can be seen emerging since 1717. And during the Battle of Plassey, 1757, they were at the peak of their powers and later they'll decline. So these people continued the patronage just like the Mughals. So they gave patronage to artisans, craftsmen, they led a luxurious lifestyle. So there was a continuity from the Mughal period in these provinces. Bengal, Awadh and Hyderabad. And then you see the Persian invasions coming in during the same period. In 1739 in the form of Nadir Shah and from 1748 to 1761 in the form of Ahmad Shah Abdali. So during this period there is a lot of loot happening. Wealth is taken away from the country. So economically India is declining. The artisans, the craftsmen, the agriculturalists, they are facing struggles. Then the Sikh and Jat rebellion. So for rebellions, you need money, and rebellions are also a product of unrest. If everything is going well, why do you need rebellion? So this is also reflective of the society. Finally, the East India Company. 1757, they fight the Battle of Plassey. 1764, they fight the Battle of Buxar. After 1764, they get the Diwani and Nizamat right. Then they implement policies like the permanent settlement. So agrarian distress is starting to happen. So these are the political developments during the 18th century, and every political dimension has a socio-economic impact. Keep these things in mind. So if you have a mains answer as well, you can invoke all these political elements and place a socio-economic impact with respect to this. Now let's see what was the general situation. Now when we talk about the situation of India in 18th century, we can say that it is declining, but it was better than the colonial times. So India can be seen as a land of contrast. India was very wealthy, but the wealth was concentrated, something that we face even now. The wealth was concentrated among a few rich and affluent class called the kingship, the nobility, the regional local chieftains, the zamindars. These people had the wealth. So there was an estimate done by an economic historian named Irfan Habib, and he made a calculation that The entire GDP, 95% of the GDP was concentrated among 5% of the people. So this estimate need not be accurate because we don't have modern data, but still a situation like that existed. It was a land of contrast. You have rich and affluent class, the people I mentioned just now, and you have a working peasantry. Agriculture was the major occupation, and these people were in distress, but it was still better than the post-colonial time. It is in post-colonial time, which is 19th century social economic situation, that we have something called famines. We also have situations where there is draining of wealth. Remember the drain theory of Dababhai Naoroji. Raw material is taken out of India and finished product is coming into the market, and India is being looted, drain of wealth. So this happens in the 19th century. In 18th century, the situation is slightly better because the transition is taking place. So we can see India is a land of contrast. And I told you, agriculture was the major occupation. Now let's see what was the specific situation of the agricultural sector. Now you can understand it in a threefold way. First, with respect to the Mughals, even though where they are declining, they had a system in place which was called the Jagirdari system. Jagirdari system means officials in the Mughal Empire will be given revenue assignments. So a land is given to you, and from that land you have the right to collect revenue. This revenue will be your salary. And there are two kinds of Jagirs, Tankwa and Watan. We have discussed this in the previous videos. You can watch that. Now, revenue assignment is Jagir. Now, what happens when the Mughals are declining? What they do is they increase the assessment of the revenue, which is called the Jama. But the actual revenue from the land is declining, or it remains stagnant. The actual revenue is called the Hasil. So there is a mismatch between Jama and Hasil in the declining period of Mughals. So this creates a Jagirdari crisis. And who is at the receiving end of the Jagirdari crisis? It is the peasants. So the people who are extracting the revenue are at the beneficial end, and people who are giving the revenue are at the receiving end. It is the peasants. So you have a situation where peasants are in distress. Then you take the case of these three polities, be it the Marathas, be it the Persians, or be it the Zamindars. These three categories were employing a means of plunder. So Marathas, when we studied Shivaji, I've told you that Shivaji was supported by highly mobile peasantry, pastoralist peasantry. So they used horses and they used to do raids. So Chauth was a famous tax imposed by the Marathas. So Chauth is a tax that you give to the Marathas, which is 1/4, 25% of the produce. This is a tax given to the Marathas to avoid raid. It is a protection money. So who is paying the tax? It is paid by the agriculturalist, the peasants, 1/4 of their produce. On top of that, additional 10% you pay Sardeshmukhi. So Chauth and Sardeshmukhi are two taxes. So you pay both of them, and peasants are in distress. Then take the case of the Persian invaders. They took everything. They took 70 crore of money from India, including the Kohinoor diamond. And the Persian state was given tax exemption because they had that much wealth from the Mughal Empire and from the general peasants, the local chieftains and everyone. In fact, one of the Awadh Nizam, he suicided because of the pressure from the Persians. Now, that was the demand of wealth. Now plunder happened. Third, take the case of Zamindars. Now when we study the history of Jats, how did the Jat kingdom came to a decline? The Jat kingdom came to a decline because Surajmal died, and after his death, you have a series of Zamindars who are indulged in plunder. So the Jat region in Madura, Agra, this region was under constant plunder by the Zamindars. So Zamindars, Marathas and Peshwas were invoking plunder, and the agrarian sector was in distress. Now finally the East India Company. They get the Nizamat and the Diwani right in 1764, which is after the Battle of Buxar. They signed the Treaty of Allahabad after the Battle of Buxar. Once this treaty is signed, they become a formidable polity, and in 1772 they establish the Governor General of Bengal. So Bengal becomes an official domain of the British. And since then, they have been introducing policies. Initially, there is the revenue settlement policy of Warren Hastings, which is from 1772. In 1793, you have Lord Cornwallis implementing the permanent settlement. In this, the demand of revenue is so high. So naturally, the peasants are at the receiving end. And in 19th century, you will see famine starting to happen. So because of all these reasons, agricultural sector is in decline. That's the situation of the agrarian sector. Socio-economic sector, this is the economic situation. And agriculture is the major profession. So when we talk about economy, it's largely about the agricultural sector alone. Now see trade. Now in the 18th century, trade hasn't declined completely in India. We still have more exports than imports. And because of this, see, when we talk about more exports, less imports, we should understand that India was a self-sufficient economy. Even without imports, we could survive. So this is why Gandhi always talked about self-sufficient Gram Swaraj, or the self-sufficient village panchayat. So this was the situation in 18th century. 19th century, this was not the case because the artisan class was destroyed. Now these are mains questions as well. You can take these questions, previous year question, and write them in the convert IAS section as well. To take it along with the prelims preparation, you can write one question depending on one theme. Now coming back to this, exports were more than imports, and because of that, India was a sink of precious metals. These things were called as bullion during that time. And British wanted to replace this because they were at the receiving end. Europeans paid a lot of money. They replaced this by taking administrative control of India. That's why they came as traders and they took administrative control of India because they were losing a lot of bullion, that is precious metals. Now you see, what were the things that India was exporting? Now this was a previous year UPSC prelims question. What India exported and what India imported. You should be very careful here. Cotton, India has black soil, you know that, in the Deccan region, and cotton is something that Indians have been using ever since the Indus Valley civilization. So cotton is something that we exported. Next step is raw silk as well as fabrics. Take any Indian ruler. When you take any period movie that is releasing in India, you can see Indian kings wearing silk clothes. So silk is something that is very much available in India, and we have been exporting this. Next up is indigo. Indigo is used in Britain during this time because they need it for dyes. Now this is what I told you. There was a previous year UPSC question. UPSC asked why indigo export from India declined in the 19th century and the 20th century. It is because industrial dyes were found. So indigo was used for its color, the blue color, the indigo color. Once industrial dyes were found, indigo became an expensive option and this thing came to an end. But until then, we had systems like the Tinkatia system, where indigo was forcibly cultivated in India. And this is something that we exported as well. Next up is saltpeter. Now you'll have a doubt what exactly it is. It is potassium nitrate. Now to see this, you can visualize it as the normal salt itself. It will look like that, but it is potassium nitrate and it is used in gunpowder. This is the time when Britain is expanding. Its artillery is expanding. Not just Britain, the entire European powers are expanding. So this is something of great demand in Europe. Then you have opium. Now here you have to understand a concept called the triangular trade. Britain was doing trade with India. So what they did was to take opium from India. They gave it to China. From China they took tea. And they took it to Britain or Europe. And from Europe they gave bullion to India, again took opium and went to this is the triangle. This is the triangle trade. Now why opium is supplied to China? Because they wanted to weaken the Chinese society to take control administratively, because China was richer than even India. They had a lot of natural resources. Now you give it to China and you take tea to Europe. Why tea is important in Europe? Because industrial revolution is happening. So initially to the industries they supplied alcohol. So alcohol is something that helped laborers to work without getting tired in the industries. Now it was replaced with tea. You give 2 to 3 teas a day and people will have a lot of energy. So tea was of demand in Europe in that time due to industrial revolution, and triangular trade was happening. So this is triangular trade, understand that. And what was taken from India was opium. So next time there should be a confusion. Then food items. Rice, wheat and sugar, because we were a major agrarian economy. Finally, spices, the thing that Vasco da Gama came for. And they need this because Europe has a cold climate and it is a non-vegetarian diet. So spices is of very importance there. Pepper, cardamom, and they came to India for this. Earlier, it was taken by the Arabs and they sold it for 10x rate to Europe. And once they found the sea route, they could cut down this cost. So these were the exported items from India. Now see the imported items. I've divided it based on states. So from Arabia, we had coffee. We had a coffee type called Arabica. There are two types of coffees, that is geography, Arabica and Robusta. So Arabia is one. Gold, drugs and honey. So oil is still not discovered in Arabia, so that is not there. Coffee, gold, drugs and honey. Then from China, tea. I've already told you China is known for tea. Silk, remember the silk route. Sugar and propylene. Now this is propylene. This is one word you may not be familiar. This is propylene. This material used to make these things. Now from Tibet, Tibet is a golden place. You have woolen clothes, musk and gold. From Africa, you have ivory because you have a lot of elephants there. The African savannas. And you have drugs. Drugs means opium and stuff like that. Then finally from Europe, Europe is known for its natural resources. Iron, lead, copper, paper, they have the manufacturing sector, and wool. So this is the imported items to India. Now one important thing that took place, so we have seen agriculture, we have seen trade, and something important, something that you won't logically guess, is the shipbuilding industry in India during the 18th century. This was a developed industry because even the East India Company brought Indian ships during that time. So you have certain regions known for it, Maharashtra, Andhra and Bengal. Shivaji, so initially the Marathas, they were focusing on land, later they developed their navy as well. They fought the Portuguese in the west coast. Now the person whom you see in this picture is the person who fought for the Zamorin in Kerala. Zamorin is a ruler in the northern coast of Kerala. The northern coast of Kerala is called as Malabar. So this person is called Kunyali Marakya. So he can be called as a freedom fighter as well. So why he is important? Because he defeated the Dutch in the sea. So defeating the Europeans in the sea is something that is very, very rare. And he is someone who did that. So it's a potential UPSC question as well. So there you have navy prominence. Here you have navy prominence, and even the Marathas were prominent, and British used to buy Indian ships. So shipbuilding industry on a whole is something that is important and developed in India in the 18th century. Now let's go to the education sector. Now education has two sides to it. One is elementary, second is higher education. In terms of elementary education, our education system was traditional. We had pathshalas and maktabas. So these two terms should be remembered because UPSC has asked in prelims about something called Chaduspadi and Tolls. So similarly, pathshalas and maktabas worked in the elementary sector. And this sector focused on traditional education. No original thinking was there. Original thinking means research. Something that is happening in Europe at the same time due to scientific revolution. So this was absent in India. Second, the modes of learning. How were people learning? They were reading, writing and arithmetic. But natural sciences were not there. So natural science is the modern day science. We called it natural science. The physics, chemistry, biology, everything was together. And we called it natural science at that time in 18th century. Now when it comes to the people who attended education, take the case of lower castes and women. This is women. So lower caste people, we cannot say that they were completely excluded from education. Sometimes they attended. There were a lot of exclusion. They were not allowed education. But there were instances where lower caste people also attended pathshalas and maktabas. When it comes to women, the presence is very scarce. Very, very minimal. Even in post-independence India, this is the case. The literacy rate of women is very low. So what you have to know is it was scarce and sometimes they attended. It's not like they didn't attend at all. Very scarce. That's the term you can remember. Now see the higher education sector. Two terms to remember here, Chaduspadi and Tol. These are the higher education centers in the Bengal Bihar region. It's a previous year question as well. And you have the madrasas. Now madrasas, this is a controversial topic that is going on right now as a current affair. Now you should understand that madrasas had a different purpose during that time. They were not centers of theological learning, because that was one side of it. Now there were two language based sessions in madrasas. One is Arabic, second is Persian. Persian was the court language. This was the language that was used in the court. Even during the British time, Persian was the initial court language. During Delhi Sultanate, it was the time. During Mughals, it was the language, and during English as well, it was the language. So see, it was the court language. So people who wanted to work in the court, they have to learn Persian. And there are centers like Azimabad, which is modern day Patna, where there were excellent Persian centers. So people who learned Persian were not just Muslims but also Hindus as well. So that's the nature of Persian education during that time. Understand it like that. Then you have Arabic. Now Quran is written in Arabic. So to be a Muslim theologian or to understand Quran or to be a ulama, you have to be ulama as a Muslim saint, a scholar. So to be an ulama, you have to study Arabic. So that side of it goes to the theological side. This side of it goes to the administrative side. So this was the purpose of madrasas. Remember why the British set up the Calcutta Madrasa. Why would they do that? They do that because they wanted to understand the law. Because law was administered based on Sharia. Sharia is the Muslim law. And people who administered law were called as Qasi. So this is one side of it. So when you talk about education, understand it like that. Understand the keywords Chaduspadi, Tol, Madrasa, two sides of it, and how the administrative system was in the 18th century. Everything will get replaced in the 19th century. So we'll discuss that separately. So to recap everything, first we talked about agriculture, then we talked about trade, then we talked about the shipbuilding industry in India, and finally we came to the education. On a whole, we can call the 18th century Indian economy as a land of contrast. But still, it was better than the period that will come after the post-colonial consolidation. So that's it from this video. In the next video, we'll continue from here. We'll talk about women, slavery, and caste system during that period. And we will also talk about the art and architecture of that period. So thank you for listening.